for square rocks. These gals must have their rocks. Diamonds are a girl's best friend.
Anita Loos was born on April 26, 1889, in California, USA. She was an American novelist and a Hollywood screenwriter, celebrated for her novel Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which later became the basis for a popular play, 2 musicals, and 2 films. By the time of her death, it had run through 85 editions and translations into 14 languages. From an early age, little more than a teenager, Anita started to dedicate herself to writing, and she also started working immediately with important people of that time, offering brilliant screenplays. In 1924, Henry Louis Mencken, a great newspaper editor of the 20s, read her short story and suggested her to publish it in Upper Bazaar magazine as a serial. Thus, the novel became popular. The success was immediate, so much that only 2 years later the entire novel was published worldwide, anticipating by many years the chick lit current, a literary genre that aims especially at young women, single women, and businesswomen. Therefore, the book became important from a literary point of view, as the author represents a pioneer of that 2000 current. The chick lit novel tends to be humorous and post-feminist in representing life and relationships. The protagonists are usually dynamic and fashionable women, aged between 20 and 40, living in big cities, and the style of the narrative tends to be irreverent, even or above all, on sentimental and sexual topics. Little girl, Henry Louis Mencken warned Anita, "You're making fun of sex, and that's never been done before in the USA." Anita herself will then oversee the theatrical and cinematographic transposition. The 1953 version with Marilyn Monroe was the last one. The novel clearly has a comic and ironic stamp, and in this regard, Luz declared that she was inspired after seeing her friend's mind, the intellectual Mencken, bewitched by the dumbest blonde of all. The book is a satire. In fact, it tells the life of Lorelei Lee, a highly stereotypical woman who is the silly blonde, and her best friend, Dorothy Shaw. 2 characters who are the opposite of each other. Lorelei is blonde, apparently obtuse, and a seeker of fat wallets and rich men who tend to give in to her charm.
I keep telling her, it's just as easy to fall in love with a rich man as a poor man. But she says yes, but if they're tall, dark, and handsome, she never gets around to finding statistics until it's too late. That's why I'm her best friend, I guess.
And Dorothy is brunette, smarter, more outspoken, and more irreverent in her opinions, and she thinks more about love than money. The story opens with a diary written by Lorelei on advice of a friend. In fact, the full title of the book is Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the illuminating diary of a professional lady. If we look at the title, it seems like Lorelei is giving us a sort of user's manual, explained by herself using the first-person narrative. And if we look at the first lines, we can notice spelling and grammatical errors and the childish phraseology that she uses, which are part of Lorelei's charm. There is no publication of the diary in the 1953 film, directed by Howard Hawks, but her blonde attitude is highlighted by the words pronounced by the actress, who says, "Thank you ever so," or "a pleasure, I'm ever so sure," instead of the common thanks or pleasure.
Thank you ever so. See?
She often makes grammatical errors due to her ignorance, Europe, France, or somebody like I, which are justified by the stereotype.
If Sissy went to Europe, France, she really needs somebody like I to educate her.
Yes, dear.
In fact, watching the film, we can notice that it isn't Lorelei, but an external narrator who describes the characters and everything that happens. Another element which can only be captured visually and therefore thanks to its film adaptation is the accentuation of one of the aspects of Lorelai's character, which concern her relentless obsession with jewelry. So much that in some scenes the American dancer imagines giant diamonds in the place of the face of rich entrepreneurs. Friendship is one of the topics covered. In fact, Lorelai and Dorothy form a very solid and indissoluble couple of friends who are poles apart both in hair color and way of thinking, but at the same time complementary. Another theme dealt with is the emancipation of the woman, as we see that it's the woman who predominates over the man, which in the common imagination is translated into that feminine charm that casts all men under her spell. In fact, Lorelai and Dorothy don't embody the submissive woman who is subdued to a man, but a strong, resolute, and self-confident woman, which is an extremely innovative aspect considering the years in which both novel and film were created. We also notice another theme, the theme of evidence, the evidence of show, the evidence of female beauty, and above all, the evidence of deception. The critic Jacques Rivette stated that evidence is a sign of Hawke's genius, an element that will always be present during the film. The cinematographic work is a continuous sparkling, but not only of jewels, a sparkling of scenes, devoid of moments of sadness or wickedness. Another aspect of the film adaptation, and at the same time an innovation which is imperceptible through the reading of the novel for obvious reasons, is the representation of the musical, which manages to leave the viewer with a great visual impact. I chose this book for many factors. First of all, the years in which Anita worked, the age of jazz with the end of the First World War and the consequent economic boom of the 20s. Luz documented the epochal change in culture, a change of a new popular freedom with women who cut their hair and danced to improvised rhythms. From my point of view, the musical is the aspect that fascinated me the most, since I am a music lover and everything in the world that translates into it. It's nice to see how the musical carries the story forward, suddenly bursting into the middle of the scenes. I love music of those years. I love the idea of the musical, and I love the songs, melodies, and chorus composed for the film. I discovered this title thanks to its film adaptation, and then I was intrigued by the book. One of the things that led me to analyze this work is how it stood out in the American literature of the time, putting itself on the reverse side of all the authors contemporary to Anita, who proposed tragedies and horrors of war. On the contrary, Anita dealt with an American-style comedy and distinguished herself not only as an author, but also as the one who was able to satirize a stereotype that has survived until the present day. Anita was one of the most distinctive literary women of the time, and it can be seen from this anecdote that has gone down in history. Recently, during a television interview in London, the question was put to me, Miss Luz, your book was based on an economic situation, the unparalleled prosperity of the 20s. If you were to write such a book today, what would be your theme? And without hesitation, I was forced to answer, gentlemen prefer gentlemen, a statement which brought the session abruptly to a close. It's therefore clear how this subject was taboo at the time, but the brazen nature of the author led her to be a promoter of broad views. The emancipation of the woman is something that unfortunately has not yet fully come to fruition in 2020, but it's thanks to women in history like Anita who has been able to highlight it, drawing the idea of the silly blonde together with her best friend and hinging the condition of the woman in ancient society seen only as a figure of the family unit. In conclusion, Anita leaves us with these words, describing her story many years after its publication. The world and its ways have changed a great deal since Lorelei Lee made her first appearance on the scene. So now, my little book passes on as a period piece to the grandchildren of its first readers.